Welcome to this very special podcast episode edition, which I'm posting on each of my podcasts because I think it's that important. The title of this episode is Be Intentional. Time to change the dialogue from symbol to substance. I focus on the phrase be intentional because I want that to be the new movement. For individuals to be intentional in what they do to get an intentional outcome. Since the death of George Floyd, millions of dollars have flowed into racial justice groups and charities with very little dialogue on what the stated outcome should be from those investments. And that's what I want to focus on. I want to be intentional. And I want the outcomes to be intentional. In an article written by Shane Goldmacher on June 16, 2020 in the New York Times entitled, Racial Justice Groups Flooded with Millions of Donations in the Wake of Floyd Death. In the article, Shane Goldmacher points to the fact that groups like Act Blue have gotten as much as $90 million since George Floyd's death. And other racial justice groups have taken in as much as $250 million. No doubt, Americans have one of the biggest charitable hearts of any country on the planet. But the question I state, and will state again, is what is a desired outcome from these charitable donations from some of the biggest corporations on the planet? Haiti Relief Fund took in $1.4 billion after the earthquake. And I think each of us can agree that nothing has changed. And that is the fear I have when it comes to the movement that has started after George Floyd's death. That millions, if not billions, will be donated with no intentional outcomes planned, and nothing will change. So that's why I want the dialogue to change. I want people saying, be intentional. Plan the outcomes. Since George Floyd's death, athletes have become the face of the movement. They have kneeled at games, held hands, and pushed organizations to continue to donate to these charities. I have one message for you. Get up off your knees and stop begging for respect. Be intentional. In 2018-19 season, the NBA teams generated $8.76 billion. The NFL generated $14.5 billion over the same time period. According to Wikipedia, 74.4% of the players in the NBA are black. 23% are white, 2% are Latino, and 0.2% are Asian. Within the ranks of the NFL, the stats are nearly the same. According to Wikipedia, in 2020, 70% of the NFL players are black, 28% are white, and 4% are Asian Pacific. When we look at the salaries that these athletes bring in, the NBA for the 2019-2020 season are estimated to have a combined salary of $3.66 billion, whereas the NFL players are closer to $7 billion, meaning that the team spent roughly $220 million per team in salaries. We have to be intentional. Why am I focusing in on pro sports? Again, because they have now become the face of the movement. But if we were intentional, you wouldn't have to beg for charities because the value that you could create from being intentional could generate billions of dollars for the communities that you want to see change in. And guess what, guys? The system is already in place for that change to happen. We just have to be intentional. And that system, my friends, is called Fractional Reserve Banking. Yeah, Fractional Reserve Banking, which involves banks accepting deposits from customers and making loans to borrowers while holding in reserve just a small fraction of the amount of the liabilities that they've made with those loans. The central bank sets that reserve amount, and so you can literally make money from nothing when you have deposits. So if we assume that the reserve is a 10-to-1 ratio, that you can make loans in the amount of $10 for every $1 invested in a bank, now you have the path to be intentional. With 74% of the NBA players helping to generate revenues of almost $9 billion, an argument can be made that 74% of the revenue from the NBA should be parked in Black-owned banks. No, we're not giving away the money. We're not talking about charity. Just put in Black-owned banks. And what if the NBA players who were kneeling put their salaries in the Black-owned banks? That's 74% of $4 billion in those same institutions. What if the 70% of the NFL players who generated that $14.5 billion for the NFL pushed for 70% to be put in Black-owned banks? And what of their salary? That's $7 billion. Again, depositing that in personal accounts within Black-owned banks. That reserve or fractional reserve banking then turns those billions into trillions of dollars of opportunities that can be lent out to businesses in the communities that are being impacted. No more charity because you don't need it, and the money still belongs to you. You don't have to give it away. Just be intentional on where you put it. So, Colin Kaepernick, you could tell Nike to put $1 billion in a black bank, and that'll have more impact than kneeling at every football game. LeBron, you can convince players to open accounts in Black-owned banks, and that'll go further than any slogan on the back of a t-shirt. Andre Iguodala, the startups you invest in, they should be putting that money in Black-owned banks. Black tech startups, you're getting money from everybody. Why hasn't some of those funds found their way to Black-owned banks? Black politicians, we're not letting you off the hook. Black mayors of majority black cities, how much are you spending with black businesses? Where are you banking city funds? Congressional Black Caucus, how many contracts can you say you directly delivered to black-owned businesses? School districts in majority black cities, where are you banking? Where are those funds? Because everyone knows that the school districts in most communities have more money than the local governments. School districts, what's your vendor management program? Are you committed to spending at least 10% of your funds with black-owned businesses in your local communities? I can tell you firsthand, we have not been intentional. A few years back, I worked with the Tuskegee Co-op program, trying to help black farmers sell their food to majority black school districts. Districts where their own kids were enrolled. And got nowhere. Why wouldn't the school districts support the local farmers whose tax dollars are coming back to fund the local schools? It's just another way to get the dollars to turn more in the communities, but we have not been intentional with trying to do that. If you have a black candidate running for an office in your community and they don't have a be intentional plan for figuring out ways to empower disenfranchised businesses, then I urge you to look for a candidate who will give you that plan, regardless of color. The fractional reserve banking can turn the money that you are intentional with into trillions of dollars of opportunities the way it does in every other community, with just being intentional. And black banks, we can't let you off the hook. If you get this money, there has to be a focused effort to develop services that will help startups win. And there have to be investments in communities where we're going to get the greatest growth. Just like Coach Herm Edwards said, you play to win the game. Be intentional with your services and focus on getting these high-flying startups, these high-growth small businesses in your portfolio and play the game to win. We don't need charity. We just need to be smarter. We need to be intentional. In 1999, I started a company called Pride Rock Holdings, a biometrics company that provided outsourced fingerprinting services, one of the first organizations to do it on a nationwide scale. By the time we were done with the company and sold it to First American, we had all the major banks on the platform. Where did I keep my money? In a small local bank where I grew up called the Sweetwater State Bank. They had over $1 million in cash in an account from a company called Pride Rock Holdings. Why did I put it there? Because that local bank gave me the first loan for me to go off to Dartmouth College from Selma, Alabama. I didn't just put the money in because they were good to me to go off to Dartmouth and leave it at that. I asked that they hire more black employees. Those black employees showed up. I asked that they invest in my startup by offering unique services that I could not get anywhere else at a larger bank. Part of the operations for my business required customers to send in checks in order to get fingerprint services. This was back in the 90s, guys. People were still writing checks. And we were getting as many as 100 to 200 checks a day for fingerprint services, particularly when we were serving many school districts in Florida. They agreed to invest in people and hardware to not only process those checks, but to log into our administrative platform and clear those people when the check cleared their bank. That was a partnership that made my business more efficient and put more deposits in their bank. That's the kind of partnership that has to happen with black-owned banks if billions of dollars flow in. It's not just banking as usual. We now have to have intentional strategies to make sure startups and small businesses succeed. Did I put money in black-owned banking institutions? Yes. My personal accounts were with every other black-owned credit union in Marengo and in Dallas County. I was intentional with my money. And if we do that here on a grand scale, we can, to paraphrase Malcolm X, move from symbol to substance. So what are the next steps? I'm going to host a town hall meeting along with my co-host, Monica Dolores Hooks. And we want to discuss a plan for how we become intentional, built on the spinal cord, which is black technology. The game changer that generates wealth within a generation that can change communities for multiple generations. And within this Be Intentional movement, we want to address the political strategy of how we leverage our communities and the dollars that flow through them to build strong financial institutions that can take advantage of fractional reserve banking. We want to carve out time to talk about a banking strategy and the services that should be wrapped around those banks that can help small businesses and startups win. And then we want to figure out an approach to change the dialogue, to move from charitable donations to people dealing with us on a business level. Put your money in these institutions and let your intentional decision change lives. And by the way, you still get the benefit of having your money grow. And finally, we want to showcase 4 Black-owned, women-founded tech startups who we believe have next. The next 4 episodes of my podcast, Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare, will feature these 4 startups. So if you will please follow me on Twitter at Gorillapreneur, on Facebook at Gorillapreneur, on Instagram at Gorillapreneur, on LinkedIn at Gorillapreneur. We will be telling you the specific date for the town hall meeting, and we need you online to share your voice, to be a part of this conversation with tech leaders, banking leaders, community leaders, to hash out this Be Intentional movement so that we get the outcomes we want. Sometimes God gives you a mission that you can't walk away from. And I think this is one of those times. And I think this is one of those missions. And I want to thank Monica Dolores Hooks for being one of the most powerful voices in making sure that this Be Intentional movement gets started. So again, please follow us everywhere at Gorillapreneur, and let's turn this into a groundswell. Thank you, guys. And as I say on most of my other podcasts, if you're not out there breaking something, your company might be the next thing that gets broken. Till next time, guys. Peace.